In this week's Torah portion, what we're going to talk about is an insight from the Torah portion on how we grow through our experiences, how we can grow, should grow through our experiences, the twists and turns in life. The Torah portion itself is an important. Come on in. Come on. We're just starting now. So
You're missing somebody. No.
he's coming.
I keep coming.
This is it's an important segue in the Torah, in the sense chronologically. What we've been doing is we've been making our way in the Jewish journey through the desert. From there's 5 books of the Torah. The 5th book is 90% just Moses recapping. That's not an official 90%, it could be 89%. But it's until the very end, it's really just Moses. It's in the last 5 weeks of his life, and he's recapping to the Jews their time together. And then the 5th book ends up with the actual final days and Moses passing. But most of it is just a reprise. So as far as you want to get the chronological grip of things, it's really only the first 4 books. Starts from the beginning of creation, the Exodus from Egypt, and the time in the desert, and then it ends with our time in the desert. Moses passes away, and the next book is the Jews going into Israel. So the 4th book is really, again, 90%, that's the end of the chronological narrative. We're more than halfway through the 4th book. Yesterday in the Torah reading, we were still in the 2nd year after the Jews left Egypt. And I got 40 years. So there's 38 years to go. This coming week, the Torah reading jumps 38 years. We know very, very little. From the Torah scripture, we know nothing, but from our history, we know very little about what went on in those 38 years. You can assume it was pretty like the couple of years we know about, Jews traveling, grumbling. It was probably the same deal going through, but the Torah gives us, this Torah is an instruction manual for life, so really chooses what we need to know for the way forward. It's not a history book.
So what year is it?
We're going to jump into, on the Jewish calendar, it will be 24. We're going to go into within the last 8 months of the Jews in the desert. So that would be the Jewish calendar date would be 2487. And when the Jews left Egypt, it was 2448.
So it's going like from the 2nd year to the
the 2nd year into the last 8 months.
Yeah, okay.
So after a lot of stuff is like front loaded, building the tabernacle, some of the drama, the spies, all that happened in the 2nd year after the Jews left Egypt. And then they existed, they moved on, they're eating manna, they're living well, and now in this week's Torah portion, we have Moses, Aaron and Miriam passing away, Moses' siblings. It's already the end of the road. So let's just take a look at the morning. I'm going to share. Morning. Okay, let's see. Okay. It's the page, good question, is 154. There, okay. So let's just do an overview of the Torah portion. It says Moses has taught the laws of the red heifer, whose ashes purify a person who's been contaminated by contact with a dead body. That's not going to be the subject of our conversation. That law was given conceivably to Moses much earlier, like in the 2nd year or so, and then the Torah portion jumps to after 40 years of, well, not exactly 40 years, but close to 40 years of journeying through the desert. The people of Israel arrive in the wilderness of Sin, Miriam, who's a leader of the Jews, she's Moses' sister. She passes away, and the people thirst for water. God tells Moses to speak to a rock and commanded to give water. This is going to be part of our conversation today, but just get ourselves together here. This is when the Jews left Egypt, 39 years before this. God, they complain that they need water. God tells Moses, there's a rock, it's a miraculous rock there in the desert. Hit the rock, and you'll see water will come out. And that rock, which is called the Well of Miriam, actually, that travels with them in the desert. Miriam passes away, and this water was seen as something that her blessing brought to the people. She passes away, the rock stops working. So God tells Moses not to hit a rock like he did 38 years before. He says, speak to the rock and command it to give water. Moses, what he does is he hits the rock. And this is like probably the illustration of Moses messing up. It's hard to figure out what he did wrong exactly, but this is the main thing that after God says you're not going to go into Israel. Moses gets angry at the rebellious Israelites and strikes the stone. Water issues forth, and Moses is told by God that neither he nor Aaron will enter the promised land. Aaron passes away, and he at a place called Hor HaHar, and is succeeded in the high priesthood by his son Eleazar. Venomous snakes attack the Israelite camp after yet another eruption of discontent in which the people speak against God and Moses, which has been their practice. God tells Moses to place a brass serpent upon a high pole, and all who gaze heavenward will be healed. Again, that's the Torah portion, not the subject of today's conversation. Here we say the people sing a song in honor of the miraculous well that provided them with water in the desert. And this is really going to be the focus. There is poetry at the very end of the Torah portion. It's cryptic, like poetry can be. It's clearly that the Jews, first of all, they're praising God for the well of water, which kind of reappears, and then they're also talking to God, thanking God for their journey, because they've been facing some really antagonistic tribes in the desert who want to kill them. We're going to be zeroing in on some of that. Moses leads the people in the battle against the Amorites, King Sichon and Og, who seek to prevent Israel's passage to their territory and conquers their lands, which lie east of the Jordan River. Okay, so what we have here is, to your Hebrew-speaking person reading just the text of the Torah, Jews have some more drama. The water, then they get the water's coming out, and they give this kind of hard to figure out praise to God. First, it's one simple song, and then there's poetry. Now, in Torah, as I said, Torah is not a history book. So there are a lot of things the Torah doesn't tell us, and our history fills in. One of the things that's not mentioned, really, only hinted at, and you wouldn't see it unless you knew about it, is that the Jews at this later stage, they're the Amorites, going through the Amorite lands. As a people, they're making their way through different lands. It's probably in the Jordan area. And these tribes don't like them, and they're trying to either kill them or damage them or keep them out of their lands, even though they're just going through. There's a supernatural tidbit that the Medrash tells us, which is that the Jews were going to go through a pass between two large mountains. One mountain has caves in it. The other mountain has jutting out rocks. and it's a narrow pass, and we're going to call them the Amorites, they're waiting for them. Because now you can ambush them, you got them in a tough spot. Jews have no clue. They're not worried. They're not planning for it. They didn't expect it. The Medrash tells us that God caused the miracle to have the two mountains come together. And as I said, some of it was jutting out, some of it was caves. So those people waiting in the crevices to attack the Jews, they got crushed. And as the Medrash will say later, God wanted the Jews to know, and they're clueless, wanted them to know that he had saved them. So in at the bottom, there's a river, the river Arnon River, and the bodies of these dead Jew haters who wanted to kill them falls into that. It merges together with the well, so they're able to see coming out of the well these people, the pieces of the people, so they knew what happened. Funky story. But Rashi is the primary commentary in the Torah and doesn't usually bring these situations unless it's necessary for us to understand it. He lays it all out. Again, it's not something you would see, but Rashi wants us to know it because he brings it up because he feels it's important for the actual flow of the story. So now let's get into this a little bit, not into the flow of the story so much, but for the lessons of it. The first text they bring is about this type of ambush. Just to understand something more recent. There's something called the Mitla Pass, which is an area in journeying from Egypt or to Egypt, going through a pass which is about 20 miles long, very narrow, and it's going through between mountains which are like 1,500 feet high. This has been a challenge anytime the Israelis have been fighting with the Egyptians. That pass, passing that safely and watching what's happening with that pass has been a danger because it's a place for similar ambushes. Again, this isn't scriptural, this is more modern history, but just to give us a feeling for what it is. Let's look at text 1a. The pilots reported, this is from a book called Warrior. The pilots reported that, and this is from the 1956 war, Suez. Pilots reported that the pass seemed empty. In other words, this is the IDF pilots. I didn't expect opposition inside Mitla Pass. The jets flying over that morning had seen nothing other than burned out trucks. Mata Gur, commander of the paratroopers, who's pretty famous in Israeli history, left. But within a mile of the entrance, the first half-track was slammed by a volley of fire high on the firewalls. The driver was killed instantly, and the half-track soared sideways and stopped. The second half-track moved up, was also hit and stopped. Matagor was on the spot. He had no question about what to do. He moved in, and as he did, he was drawn into battle with an entire Egyptian infantry battalion that had dug themselves into the ledges and caves of the cliff walls and had not been noticed by our planes. So the IDF is in a very tough spot here in the 56 war. The battle was raging with this leader, Motagur, still pinned down. The reconnaissance unit skirted the cliffs on the right side, hoping to come down on the Egyptians from above. But when they got to the ridge, they were hit by a hail of bullets from the caves and hidden ledges on the far side. Unable to identify the source of fire, they assumed it was coming from below them and stormed down the wall. Here, some of them fell to their deaths, while others were caught by fire from the positions below as well as from those opposite them. So this was a tough spot. Now let's go back to what the Rashi or the Medrash are telling us what went on with the Jews between the lines in our Torah portion. The Amorites, who hated Jews, they're lying in wait. There were two towering mountains with a deep, narrow gorge between them. The cliff wall stood so close that a man could stand on one side and talk to his friend on the other side. The walking trail ran through this gorge. When the Jews entered the Amorite lands through this canyon, the Amorites intended to emerge from the caves in the mountains above and kill them with arrows and catapulted boulders. So they're about to walk into a trap. Jews, they left Egypt, they're 40 years in the desert, they're tired, they want to get to Israel already, and they're tired of fighting with people too, and they're about to walk into a deathly trap. So we have on text 2a, which is page 158, to continue, well, how did it work out in 1956? It says, by this time, the enemy positions had been located, and after nightfall, 2 small units were sent along the cliff walls of IDF. Moving slowly along the cliff face, they attacked one Egyptian cave and firing hole after another in hand-to-hand fighting. They did it. The IDF is fighting hand-to-hand to clear up this pass. For 2 hours, the sounds of battle reverberated through the pass before finally giving way around 8 o'clock to an ominous silence. When morning came, it was evident that the battle on the pass was over. From the caves and recesses where the Egyptians had been, there was no movement. Inside them, 260 Egyptian soldiers lay dead, and whatever survivors there might have been had slipped away during the night. The 38 paratroopers had also been killed. So the IDF lost 38, they lost 260, but we have a lot less to lose. So it turned out well, although they lost a lot of soldiers. How did it turn out in the desert? With in this case, with the Amorites, the Jews, there were clefts in the mountains on the Moab side of the canyon. Moab is an area in Jordan. Directly opposite, said these clefts on the mountain on the Amorite side, there were protrusions that looked like horns and breasts. When the Jews prepared to pass through the canyon, the mountain on the side of what would soon be Israel trembled like a maidservant emerging to meet or greet her mistress, and moved toward the mountain on the side of Moab. Its protrusions entered the clefts on the other mountain, thus killing the Amorites. Again, this is a supernatural thing, kills these people lying in wait to ambush. Now, another element, Rashi. This is in the Medrash, in our history, because I said there's a lot in our history. Now, Rashi usually doesn't, he's not a history book either. His job, he says, I want to allow a 5-year-old to understand, to read the Torah. And obviously have to know Hebrew, but to be able to read it without a hitch. And he's anticipating, when Rashi comments, he's anticipating a question someone would not understand. Either in what a certain word might mean because of its usage, or because it may seem the flow may not work. What about what's said over there? Whatever, or preparing for something else. It's always, he just wants to make it explainable. So he finds and because I'm not going to get into it now, it's not going to be a study of that. He finds in the language, he said that it's like what someone's supposed to make of it. It's so cryptic. So he feels it's important to bring in this history, which ordinarily would be for a scholar, a medrash, a history class. It wouldn't be in here. It doesn't say it, but it's hinted at. And he's saying it the only way to understand the flow of the language and what it's hinting at is to give the background and understand what was being given. He's quoting here. He's quoting here from rabbis of the Talmud, but that's not his job usually. Only if it's important to help with the narrative flow. So he says, from there, the blood of the slain flowed into the well. That their miraculous well. How did this happen? God said, "Who will inform my children of these miracles?" The proverb says, "If you give a child bread, inform his or her mother." This is another thing. It's an interesting idea. The Talmud says, there is such a thing as giving an anonymous gift. It's a charity. Anonymous charity is a very high, dignified level. But in gifts between people, part of the gift is to let someone know I care. So some things, sending it anonymously, kind of it defeats the purpose. I'm trying to say, I'm thinking about you. I'm trying to say, I love you. Just leaving anonymous flowers for a spouse there's like, is there a secret admirer? I admire you. I care. So God, so there's a language that if you give bread to a child, make sure to tell the mother. First of all, like this, the mother knows that they ate already. Aside from that, it's to anonymous gifts. Sometimes it doesn't fill the purpose because you want to be able to say, I care. So here, and God said, I want the Jews to know I did this. I don't want them to just be the beneficiary. We all benefit from things that we can't see. God's watching us. We don't even know what was coming at us, and God took care of us. But here, God said, I want them to know that I intervened for them. So what happened? After the Jews passed through, the mountains returned to their original location. Since that happened, the Jew haters fell down into the river. The well descended into the river and brought up the blood, arms, and limbs of the slain and carried them around the Jewish camp. The Jews saw what had happened and sang an ode. So at the end of this week's Torah portion, one of the things you'll see is that the Jews said, wow, they sing praise, something with the well. Is it that the well was giving them water? They've been having water for 40 years, although they lost it now for a little bit after Miriam passed away. What they're seeing is that they realized what had happened, that these people had died, had been laying in wait, and that they had died, and God had stood up for them. So to look at what the Torah says, text 4a in this week's Torah portion. It's not working. It says, at that time, this is the language of the verse, the Israelites sang this ode, this song to God, ascend, O well, sing to it. In other words, we're praising God for the well. Now, interestingly, there are two times in the Jewish journey in the desert that we find them singing praise to God. They have lots of reasons to sing praise. They got manna, they're being protected, they have pillars of fire, clouds of glory, what all the stuff we got. There are two times, specifically with water, that they had a salvation and they sang to God. One is in this week's Torah portion, where they look at the well and they see how the people who wanted to murder them, God eliminated, and they praise God. 4b is the more famous one. This is after the Jews go through the split sea. Jews on the way out of Egypt. This is going to be referenced in our Seder. We actually have it in our prayers every day. It says that Moses and the children at that time, Moses and the children of Israel sang this ode to God. So what we had earlier in the Torah is that it's not the same thing of water, but it's water. The Jews go through a split sea. There also, God drowns the Egyptians, so that's similar. Saves them from danger. And they both times they sang a song. In the first one, if you'll notice, in 4b, it says Moses and the children of Israel sang this ode to God. It was Moses leading it. Moses is the leader. This time, what we read in this Torah portion says the Jews. Moses is a Jew. He probably sang too. But it's not Moses in leadership. That's number one. And number two, just an oddity, we don't find the Jews singing a song of praise to God for the manna, even for the drinking water. We don't find it the clouds of protection. It was specifically for these two situations where God saved them. Now, even though he, in a way, it saved them in other ways too. So let's take a look at the understanding of what went on and the Jewish response to it. Let's go back to the Jews leaving Egypt. The Egyptians are chasing them. They're facing the sea, and they're scared. And they turn to God. And God says, don't do anything. Don't do anything. The language is God will fight for you and you remain silent. That's very unusual. Usually, God waits until, first of all, we try to better a situation ourselves. We put in our own human effort, or we just turn to God and say, help us out. Here, actually, Moses turned to God and prayed, and he said, what are you talking to me for? Quiet. I'll take care of this. God says, I don't need you to ask. I'll take care of this. Now, why was that? The unique novelty of this miracle, in the way the Rebbe explains it, was, as the Torah specified, God will fight for you and you remain silent. In other instances of danger or endangerment, our ancestors had to go to war and battle their enemies. And then God ensured their rescue, salvation, and victory in miraculous fashion. But we had to do our thing. You've got to, that's life is like that. You try to do your best, you put in your effort, and you pray to God for success. At the splitting of the Sea of Reeds, however, Jews were in a state of silence. They were told to be in a state of silence. They did nothing to save themselves from the Egyptians. God and only God fought with the Egyptians. And that's what generated the song. Think about, you're with someone special in your life. And you say, I'm thirsty. And that special person says, here, I'm going to grab you a bottle of seltzer, a can of seltzer. You say, thank you. It's nice. It's gratitude. What happens if you're thirsty and you didn't say anything? But that special person picks up nuances and says, here's a can of seltzer. You look thirsty. It's being attuned to, there's friendship and then and caring, but there's a certain love relationship where we kind of anticipate, at least sometimes, in advance of the need in order not to be asked. And that's what the Jews experienced there. When God steps in for us there at the splitting of the sea, and there's all the heavy lifting in our stead, he demonstrates his extreme love for us. Not only does he save us from danger, he also spares us the need to perform even a slight effort. We didn't even have to ask for it. This is why this miracle spurred the Jews to sing an ode to God. So the Jews felt so taken care of. The Jews felt so loved that it's not only that God is somewhere up there watching, and when we turn, God responds. God's with us in our journey and knows what the challenges are and is taking care of us. In this case, we didn't even have to ask. God says, I see you're in trouble, I'll take care of you. That, even though they had so many wonderful gifts from God, that spurred their love and their song, because they felt so taken care of. The same occurred at the Arnon River. Now, that was 38 years earlier, and now also at the Arnon River, they had the same thing. Here too, God saved us in a manner of God will fight for you and you remain silent. Thus, this miracle also inspired the Jews to sing an ode. When the Jews were back, when they left Egypt, they knew they were in trouble. The Egyptians, they could see the Egyptians are chasing them. They can see that there's the sea in front, but they didn't have to ask, and God came in there. Here, they didn't even know. There are people ambushed. God took care of them. They could have just walked through. They wouldn't know how they'd been saved. They didn't. Not only it happened totally oblivious, they were totally oblivious to it, and they saw afterwards how God had saved them from something. They felt great. So what they did was they came out in song. They expressed themselves in song. Look at text 5c. The element of God fighting for you was prevalent in the miracle of Arnon to the extent that the Jews knew neither of the danger nor of the salvation. In every other trial, Moses either solved the problem or prayed to God for salvation, like we all do in life. In this case, salvation was facilitated without Moses' involvement. God did the fighting, and the Jews remained silent. This was even truer now than at the Sea of Reeds. At the Sea of Reeds, the people were aware of the danger, and Moses prayed for them. In this case, God saved them before they even knew the danger. And at one level, you can say that's why Moses didn't lead them in the song, because he didn't even ask for anything. He was just like he hadn't had a leadership position in bringing the salvation. But there's another element, another perspective on this. Why didn't Moses lead them in the song this second time? This is a great rabbi from the 12th century. He says Moses does not sing because the well was his stumbling block. This well has been an issue. Just earlier, he'd whacked the rock, and God had rebuked him. And now the well is what's showing how the dead bodies. Moses is shrinking, saying that well, I haven't done well with it. I haven't. That's he shrinks because of his own self-consciousness. That's one way of looking at it. The thing is, on a deeper level, see, Moses, his self-consciousness, he's a leader of the Jews. If it's time to sing praise to God, why doesn't Moses lead them in the singing of the praise? So now we're going to get closer to what our real topic is here. First, we're trying to understand, why didn't Moses step up and lead the song? I'm going to talk about the well. As I mentioned before, the Torah earlier, when the Jews came out of God earlier, when the Jews came out of Egypt, and the Jews were thirsty, he said, there's a special stone, strike the flintstone, hit it, water will emerge from it, and the nation will drink. So hitting the stone was a great mechanism, a divinely guided mechanism to bring out water. Why didn't it work at the end of the time of the desert? Why was it so terrible that he hit the rock and not speak to it? It worked 38 years ago. Why shouldn't I try the same mechanism? So the Medrash tells us, look, why did it say talk to the rock now at the end of the time of the desert? In 7b. The passage doesn't say strike the rock like it did the first time 38 years earlier. God was giving Moses an important lesson. And this is kind of central to what we're doing here today. It says, when students are young, teachers sometimes require to restrain them to teach them to avoid danger. Once they grow older, they can only be taught with. What does that mean? If I have a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, and we're crossing a street, I gotta hold my hand. I have to restrain them, because just saying don't walk into the street, to a 3-year-old, not necessarily. Actually, a 5-6-year-old also not necessarily. We need to act. Today we would call it acting on children. You want to develop children so that they can learn and do their own thing. We act on them when they really don't have the maturity to make the right decisions. We say, no. Now everyone stay in the line as we're walking down the hallway in school. Sometimes you have to, again, act on them, not just explain to them and rely on their judgment. When God told Moses, strike the rock, that's when the Jews had just come out of Egypt. And the rock showing flowing water was in a way a metaphor for the Jews showing their best selves. And he said, you're going to have to act on them. You don't have to whack them, but you're going to have to treat them like children. Now, at the end of the desert journey, talk. They're you have an adult child. You don't have to act on them as much. You speak, and if they're reasonable, they understand. So it was saying there, it's only with words. We don't act on them. We explain. So the hitting of the rock was at a certain developmental stage. When the Jews were at an immature developmental stage, just coming out of Israel, the God of Egypt, God reflected that and saying, here, to bring out the water, to have them show their best selves, hit the rock. And now, as the Jews are about to end their time in the desert, don't hit the rock, talk to it. And here's how one of the great commentaries explains it. When the Jews were in Rephidim, which means when they came just out of Egypt, their commitment to the Torah grew slack. They were new to this. The spiritual consequences was that they ran out of water. Their lack of water was a reflection of their lack of spiritual connectedness. The spiritual, because water is the spiritual symbol of the Torah.
Rabbi, I'm sorry, what is Rephidim?
Rephidim is a place. Rephidim is, well, the Torah calls it, it says they came out of Egypt, they camped in Rephidim. And that's where this whole drama went on about the water. Now, Rephidim, the Talmud comments and Rashi comments that Rephidim is linguistically something is Rafa, or that or Rafa means weak. So in other words, they grew weak, they slack when it came to their spiritual connectedness. So God wanted to teach them that people in their spiritual infancy, which means that they're new to the path of the Torah, sometimes require physical restraint. They need guidance. They might not take up their slack and allow the flow of their own spiritual water unless physically compelled to do so. That's why sometimes you have to have reward and punishment with children and things like that. You're trying to get them past their own weaknesses to bring out their best selves. At a certain point, you shouldn't need that. God indicated this by instructing Moses to make the flintstone give water by striking it. Similarly, the people might require physical restraint to embrace the Torah, which is often compared to water. They needed to be really shepherded, herded in the beginning. This is the manner of teachers with young students who are about to get into trouble. You might have to physically restrain. If they're throwing chairs at each other or chalk, whatever. With kids, sometimes you have to physically restrain, but at a certain point, you hope you don't have to. 40 years later, when they're in the desert of Kadesh, which is the place they were, and in the Hebrew, that would mean holiness, they had spiritually matured and embraced the yoke of the Torah. Therefore, a verbal reminder would have sufficed to help them avoid their spiritual pitfalls. God implied this by instructing Moses to talk to the stone and it would give its water. So Moses, at the end of his life here, it's not just God said, speak to the stone and you hit the stone. He was off track with understanding where the Jewish people are up to. He said, after over 40 years in the desert, they've grown. Have they made mistakes? Absolutely. But they grew from their mistakes. They are not the same immature people spiritually immature people that he took out of Egypt. And therefore, him to saying that I'm going to strike the rock, in other words, that I'm going to deal with you developmentally the same way I did 38 years ago, is an insult to the people. And it's really what it is it's not recognizing and encouraging within them their own growth. And this is where this whole journey has been taking us. Let's take a look at text 8a. And we're going to talk a little bit about water and how water gets filtered in a subterranean way. In the United States Geological Survey, large amounts of water are stored in the ground. The upper layer of the soil is the unsaturated zone, where water is present in varying amounts that change over time but does not saturate the soil. Below this layer is the saturated zone, called groundwater, where liquid water is stored in all the pores, cracks, and spaces between rock particles. The term aquifer refers to water-bearing foundations or rocks that can hold large amounts of water. So an aquifer may look like a rock, but it actually can contain large amounts of water. Aquifers are a huge storehouse of Earth's water, and people all over the world depend on groundwater in their daily lives. So we think of water, obviously there are regular plumbing, but water, bodies of water. There's a lot to water being within the rocks, within the rock formation, text 8b, because that actually helps the water. Most rivers exchange water with surrounding groundwater aquifers. Waterways can either gain water from or leak water into the ground, depending on the underlying rock formations and groundwater levels. Where groundwater levels lie below those of nearby streams, water can infiltrate, thus reducing river stream flow and recharging the aquifer below. So the exchange between the rivers and the water in the rockage is a critical element in how our water develops. And 8c, the water is crudely filtered in the rock, and the time spent on the ground allows debris and mud to fall out of suspension. So actually the water is purer for having gone through the rock. If underground long enough, the lack of sunlight causes most algae and water plants to die. So what is that saying? Saying is that just like water gets purified through its journey, through the rocks, it's not pretty. It may even look a little, muddy, but through its journey, it becomes purified. And for us spiritually, we see in that an important lesson for life, not only for the Jews in the desert, but for ourselves. If you want to look at text 9, page 170. Our souls, this is the founder of Chabad writing this, our souls are vested in physical bodies for our duration on the earthly plane for only one reason. Now, he's addressing the idea. You have God takes a bundle of spirituality, a soul, godly, connected to the divine, in a beautifully tranquil space, and then puts that soul into the human condition with a lot of twists and turns and a lot of impulses and a lot of challenges, when life would have been so great just hanging out with God. And here what he's saying is there's only one reason. In order for us to grow, for us to become metaphorically a subterranean wellspring. God put us into what we're going to call a subterranean journey. When water travels through soil, it is filtered and purified. When we travel through the mud, the difficulties of the physical world, similarly, our souls are filtered when we perform what are filtered. And as we come out, our souls become strengthened. In other words, the souls we return to God when we pass on are, God willing, stronger, more connected, more actualized than the soul that came into our bodies. And part of that is dealing with physical acts of mitzvot, tactile objects. We're not dealing with spirituality. We're dealing with seltzer, with a laptop. Deeper still is when our godly soul prevails over our animal soul to restrain it and to transform its darkness into light. Any of us, when we deal with an impulse, that's not an impulse that is leading us in a healthy direction. It's not an impulse that's going to add to the functionality of life, the proper functionality of life. And we struggle with it, and we put it in its place. And we, to the extent we can, we master it. We haven't just avoided a problem. We've become stronger. We've exercised our own self-discipline, our own self-mastery. In other words, our body's corporeality, physicality, and the world's physicality form a passageway through which the soul reconnects with its root, the living God. So life is a journey of a ball of godliness, going through this cycle we call life, and going back to connect with God, hopefully filtered, strengthened. Creating this wellspring entails digging and carving the removal of the soil that seals the mouth of the wellspring. Yes, if we go further, I've shared this over the years. What comes up to me and as when I talk about something like this is that when I was a student, when I first went off to Brooklyn, I was 12 years old, 11, 12. So when I came into the yeshiva, I learned a rhythm, a routine that the students had. There was an elderly rabbi who used to sit in. He had taught my father, and so he had Parkinson's. He couldn't speak. You couldn't understand him. But he was, out of respect for him, he sat for a good number of hours a day in the study hall. Yeah, he had his place, and he was someone to look at, to see, but he really couldn't walk. So students had to walk him to the bus, on the bus, because he'd come from Crown Heights and we were in Flatbush, and then anywhere he could not walk on his own. So we all took turns walking. And I saw the drill, when I first learned it, you'd have to walk with him. He could shuffle. He seemingly could not pick up his feet. And then every once in a while, he couldn't even shuffle. He would like lean forward. I don't know why all this is neurologically, but that's what it was. He would lean forward. Then what we were supposed to do was put our feet in front of a foot in front of his feet to block him, so he couldn't shuffle. And then somehow he was able to find the strength to step over the foot. And then he would shuffle a little bit more, another 10 shuffles. And then we go that was the routine. We'd go over and over. And standing and watching, I was thinking, if you could pick up your foot, why didn't you pick up your foot? Why do you only pick up your foot when I'm blocking it? I don't know, neurologically. But what it meant to me was that sometimes when we come up in the human condition, when we come up against a brick wall, we find strength to get over it that we wouldn't have imagined we had before. So here, similarly, we must remove everything that conceals and covers our innate love for God. The assumption is that all of us want to be connected to God. Love is a strong word, but we all want to be connected. We accomplish this by restraining our competing drives. We have things that we do, we really want to do, things that are tasty, that look fun, and maybe going in that direction takes us away from, our best selves and who we might think, or we know who God would want us to be. So compelling ourselves to avoid the forbidden and to indulge in the permitted only for the sake of heaven for holy purposes. This subordinates our will to his will. So I think the challenges in life, our appetites, our impulses, those things, they purify us. This includes committing to studying the Torah for longer periods than we're accustomed to, giving more charity than we're naturally inclined to give. These and similar behaviors dig, carve, and remove our inner coarseness rooted in impurity till they are completely nullified. This brings our hidden love for God into the open. The Rabbi Shazam, this author, in his book of Tanya, which is the foundational book of Talmudic thought, he quotes the Talmud. He says that the Talmud is saying that whatever a donkey, renting a donkey to go 2 miles it's $5. 3 miles is $10. Why? Because the normal range is 2 miles. And get to do the donkey to go extra. It's not just prorated. Going beyond the norm takes extra effort. The Talmud uses that to say, what's the difference between someone serving God and not serving God? He said students in the days before there were books, the routine was that you didn't leave the class until you reviewed the lesson 100 times. So the Talmud says a student who reviews the lesson 100 times, which is their norm, it's a good person. Someone who reviews it 101, that's serving God. In other words, not getting past your status quo, your comfort level. And here, what it's saying is here's what I'm comfortable giving. I'm gonna dig in a little bit more. I'm going to pay that much more attention. I'm gonna be that much more present. I'm not gonna just do what makes me comfortable. Because God matters to me, because a meaningful life matters to me, I'm going to stretch myself a little bit. That's called purifying ourselves. That's the filter. So here, the Jews had gone through a 40-year filter on page 171. After the Jews traveled into the desert for 40 years, then the Torah states, God did not give you a heart with which to know and eyes with which to see until this very day. It's amazing. The Jews came out of Egypt. They saw all the fireworks that we speak about at the Seder. They saw the splitting of the sea. They went 7 weeks after leaving Sinai. They're in Egypt. They're at Mount Sinai, and God's talking to them. They hear God's voice. 10 Commandments. It's unbelievable. But only at the end of the 40 years does God say, now you finally have a heart with which to know and eyes with which to see. After 40 years in the desert, why? What happened to them? What was the epiphany they had? The epiphany was struggling with life, to the extent they struggled with it in the desert. Our sages of blessed memory observe. From this, we infer that it takes 40 years for pupils to ascend to the level of their teacher's knowledge. However, after 40 years, one does indeed master one's teacher's knowledge. In other words, even the lessons that they had from watching what went on in Egypt and getting the Torah and standing at Sinai, that was just dropped on them. For them to really to integrate those lessons into life and into the regular struggles of life is only at the end of the 40 years that Moses says, now you got it. Now you've matured. What would mature them? Not some lightning bolt from God, but dealing with the struggles of life. What we're calling the filter. Text 11. That the Jews sang their oath. So let's go back to this thing again. It's about water, but this idea with in this week's Torah portion, they sang their oath to God without Moses' leadership. Remember, Moses led the song when they went through the split sea. This time, he's not even mentioned. The Jews did it on their own. It was a do-it-yourself. God there tells us they merited to become like a wellspring of living waters. They didn't need to be led by Moses. They had that spiritual connectedness. This is an exalted level of purity that the predecessors in the previous generation did not merit to attain. They had spiritually matured. Talk about it in a very minimal way. Maybe a child, when they get something, have to say thank you. At a certain point, you recognize and you say yourself to say thank you. Maybe you'll even write a card. Maybe you'll express something. That write a card, not just buy a Hallmark card, right? But express it because you know that this is an important thing. We communicate. We feel. The Jews at this level, and why the Torah is bringing it here, is that there's a very important distinction between the two songs. The one in the beginning of the journey in the desert, one at the end. One needed to be led and conducted by Moses because they didn't have it yet. The Torah is trying to tell us that the Jews at the end of their 40 years in the desert, they'd gone through life's filter. And what we're doing now, we're not in the desert, thank God, but life is considered that journey in the desert.
But there's a little more to it than that.
I'm sure there is.
And that is, Moses had been told he was not going to pass over.
Right.
And this is
Caesar.
the 40th year immediately before that.
Right.
So basically what they're saying here is, okay, you're going to be doing it without Moses. Here's where you start.
I think that there can be an element of that the idea was that they needed to recognize that Moses was a human being. He was a very helpful leader, but he was going to pass away, and now ultimately they're responsible for their own lives as individuals, as a people. That works for me.
I have
Yeah.
question. So So the Amorites were killed and the remains went through the water.
Yeah.
Well, wouldn't that poison the water?
Yeah, strikes me that too. So they probably weren't able to get drinking water for at least a couple of hours until they all flushed out.
Oh, but if the lesson is, the water is purifying. It's been poisoned.
Okay, so that's a good question. I think that the lesson is that ultimately water, not just in the miracle of the well, water is
what?
not just in the miracle of the well, water in nature is purified through this difficult journey through the dirt and the rocks. In the case of the well, God wanted to show them that give them reason for them to express their own wellspring of gratitude, of love, connection. And so through that well, they were able to see, yeah, it's bloody and gory. It strikes me too. I wouldn't want to drink from it. It's so bad, but eventually it's all flushed out. I think there was a lot of imagery to the well. The well was, we all have a wellspring of connection in ourselves. And sometimes we're we need to tap it properly with someone who matters. Sometimes we can express, sometimes we can't express, sometimes we can feel it with God, sometimes we can't. And this was about them feeling it and about recognizing that God's looking out for them. And perhaps each of us in our own lives, I feel I've had this, something that I didn't even know what was going on, but afterwards I realized what happened. I said, thank God I missed that. Thank God for that. And I didn't duck anything because I didn't know it was coming at me. But I when I see later what could have happened or would have happened, something was pretty good. So I that was a sense of God showing them at this stage in the game that you're not always going to see God splitting seas. You're not going to see God whacking your enemies like in Egypt, but God always has your back. And here he showed them where he had, this like almost maybe a final send off. Say, look what I did. So try to find your own wellspring of feeling.
All right.
So go for it.
All right, so you brought, there's really like two midrashes here. One is like God's doing for us what we could not do for ourselves.
Right.
And the other one is that they spiritually develop.
Yes.
So how are the two of them? Are they two different? Are they intertwined?
I think that they're intertwined in the sense that when you're more spiritually developed, you recognize that you're the beneficiary. Let me put it this very, very, very rudimentary. I don't know how many college students wake up in the morning saying, wow, I really appreciate my parents paying tuition. But when they start paying tuition, they start, I'm sure it's not unusual when they start to say, Mom, thanks, I didn't realize the burden you carried. It takes maturity. And this, so at the end of the road here, of their journey in the desert, God gives them this lesson because it's part of their, they didn't have the spiritual maturity earlier to really be able to appreciate that. Actually, yes, Leon.
Rabbi, hi. I have a question. There are some leaders, at least immediately comes to mind Rizal, that was relatively young. And I can say that in science, for example, a lot of physicists like Einstein and others have come with discoveries around in their early to mid-20s. And Rizal was 33, I guess, when he died. So they didn't have
Rizal is named Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, a great Kabbalist from the 1600s. Yes.
Yeah, so they did not have that level of maturity yet that they went through, yet they were recognized as as le- as leaders, right? Is Did they exhibit different type of, or they brought different type of leadership? Like Rizal versus, let's say, those that came in,
It's a great question. I don't know the answer to that. I would say though that in general, there is a Torah perspective that experience gives us wisdom. And age and experience go together. Can some people do they operate more quickly? Yeah, I mean, I remember when I was working in transcribing the Rebbe's talks, his Shabbos talks, which were not recorded. So after after Shabbos, we'd have to get together and try and piece it together. And I was 21, and there was a 15-year-old boy there, who was just brilliant. It wasn't not so much that he had the like a photographic memory. He had a maturity of understanding that I don't find in in the 20s, 21, 22. There's a certain opening of the mind, and I just think his mind opened earlier. And he had not just be able to remember. He had a mature understanding of what was being said. And I'm still in touch with him somewhat, but sometimes the people mature quicker. I don't know, because I don't have an answer for exactly what one time with Rizal with Einstein. But I think as a general rule, and the Torah is giving us more of a general rule of humanity. General rule, we learn something, and then it needs to digest. And in the words of the Talmud, you don't really understand the law until you mess it up.
mhm.
And then you say, "Oops! Now you got it. Now this one you're going to remember." Mistakes teach us a lot of stuff. Right, and experience teaches us stuff. I can, then there are some people who are, I can't explain them because I'm not that much of a connoisseur on souls.
Thank you.
Yes, Joyce.
About a question on
yeah.
page 170.
Yeah.
It says similarly, you must remove everything that conceals and covers our innate love for God and
Yeah.
to fast track it. Indulgence is permitted only for the sake of heaven. What is that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I kind of I float over that because it's a whole conversation, but I'm glad you
I
brought it
figured it would be.
up. Okay.
The short version.
There is a we can sit here and talk about how people's drives and passions get in the way of who they can be and should be. If their passion is for, theft or drugs or all that bad stuff. What if I like gefilte fish? I love gefilte fish, and I eat gefilte fish 3-4 times a day. What's wrong with that? What? Not necessarily anything wrong with that, except that indulging myself is indulging my self-orientation. So in Hasidic thought, the idea is that what is forbidden is forbidden, and what is permitted may not be necessary to discipline ourselves. So, and that's not to be led by our drives. So I know when I was a student in yeshiva, I asked a teacher of mine, like, what does that mean? And how do I tell myself that? How do I show myself that and not delude myself? And he gave me a very simple exercise. In those days in the yeshiva, every night we had chicken and either some starch or some whatever. It was, it was going to be chicken. And what would happen is we would stand online, and this cook, Mrs. Rappaport, she would ask you want a top or a bottom. She'd put it on the plate. potatoes, whatever, and go. And this rabbi, Rabbi Tzibel, he said to me, when you go downstairs to supper tonight, and Mrs. Rappaport asks you if you want a top or a bottom, tell her, whichever. So it says like this: if you like a top and you got a bottom, trust me, it's not going to kill you. You're going to get the same nutrition. Live with it. You showed yourself you didn't have to have. Even if you get the top, which is what you like, you showed yourself that you're the boss of your life. You're not led by a piece of chicken. You happen to be eating something you like. There's nothing wrong with liking it. But it's not that your focus is on what you're filling your sensual needs. You use those things because you need to be healthy. You need to eat. You need to take care. But it's not so. You're not driven so much by your sensual needs. What is he saying here? Because the more we give into our sensual needs, being our North Star, that can get us into trouble. So that's a distraction.
So I actually was asking
Yeah, good.
about the words for the sake of heaven.
For the sake of heaven means the sake of heaven means if I need to be healthy, God created me, I need to be healthy. So if I went downstairs to eat the chicken, and it's kosher chicken, and they made a blessing on it, and it's chicken I don't particularly like because it's a bottom and I want it at the top. What am I doing? I'm doing it because I need to be healthy. I'm eating because God wants me to be healthy, and it's not so bad. And it's not like I'm eating something I hate, right? But it's eating for the sake of heaven means for a higher purpose. Eating to be healthy in order to be to be the person God wants you to be. That's for the sake of heaven. For me, eating to be able to look good on the beach, that's a pretty funny visual, right? Is that would be something that's more self-centered. I need to be alive and healthy to be able to make my impact in the world. That's called for the sake of heaven.
Especially as long as you get the French fries, yeah.
You know my vices. All right, I'll leave it over there. Unless there are any other questions. Another question you said?
You wanna run through the key points or no?
You know something?
Yes.
Yeah, now that you mentioned it, why not? Okay, key points. Number one, sometimes we have a problem and God takes care of it. Sometimes we don't know we have a problem. We discover it only after the problem is solved. Number two, the latter leaves us feeling even more grateful than the former. It gives us a powerful sense of being cradled by God. Number three, nevertheless, we do not yearn for a problem-free life. Life without problems would be pleasant and smooth. But without resistance, there's little growth. Right? That's what the key of exercise has to be resistance. And finally, no.
Two more.
I don't know what's happening here. Second.
Slider down, yeah.
Okay. Now let's put this back. As spring water is filtered by traveling through the soil, so is our character formed and our metal forged by overcoming the problems of life. And five, our Jewish metal is forged by confronting and overcoming weakness and temptation. Disciplining ourselves to give more charity than we want or spend more time in prayer and study than we intend creates inner fortitude and spiritual maturity.
You know, when you're driving down the road, paying attention,
Yeah.
traffic, what's in front of you, whatever, and you, in your peripheral vision, you catch a billboard,
Okay.
okay? And you only have about 5 or 6 seconds to read it,
Mhm.
and it's gone. Yeah, I wonder what it said, what it's all about. There was this section here, the maturity curve.
Okay.
And we were going through that, and what was going through my mind was the issue of the ultra-Orthodox being inducted into the army. And the problems that people perceive.
Figured you'd bring up just a light topic, right?
Well, like I said, you only have a few seconds. I didn't want to stop you, but it went through my mind, and I said, all right, you go back to it. there may be
I would think
there
that.
may be a parallel, there may be not, but it hit my mind that, gee, I wonder if there's some nexus there.
I think that Israel as a nation is maturing. Jews are always maturing, and that people of goodwill can find a happy medium where the needs of the country are taken care of and the spiritual needs are protected.
That was a very diplomatic answer,
Have a great week, everybody.
very diplomatic.